Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is the deep dive into grid hardening innovation webinar, focusing on how Orlando leverages data strategy, AI, and drones for success. So with that, we will, let me just run us through the agenda first. There will be the usual introductions, a pretty deep dive industry perspective, a look at the centralized data framework that made all this possible, not to get ahead of myself. We'll talk about next steps, sort of a conversation for organizations that might be wondering how to get started or how to take things further. And then, of course, we've left some time at the end for questions. So moving on into the introductions, I'll let Justin kick us off. Justin, over to you.
Absolutely. My name is Justin Kramer. I'm the Director of Emerging Technologies and Data Analytics at Orlando Utilities Commission. We are the kind of innovation arm of the utility. Think less Petri dishes and lab coats and more systems integration, techno-economic analysis. So I run the innovation side, and then I also run the data analytics side, which includes the data centralization strategy for the utility. Other items that we have in that portfolio include AI and drones. So we kind of cover a little bit of everything in this space. With that, I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Great. Thanks, Justin. So I'm Matt Zingariello. I'm Vice President of Keyrus's Strategic Advisory Practice. And this practice focuses on data strategy, data governance, basically helping organizations like OUC to do the most they can with the data that they have. And as we will see throughout this presentation, data, its centralization, its availability, and its use are a strong recurring theme, and that is what we thrive on. So that's all I'll say for now, and I'll hand it on over to Kenny.
Hi, my name is Kenny Edwards. I'm the Data Insights Portfolio Lead here in Keyrus US, and also the Technical Project Manager for the implementation of OUC's Enterprise Data Analytics project. So I've been working closely with Justin and Matt on all of these initiatives.
Perfect. I think we can go on to the next slide. Great. So I just wanted to give a quick intro to what Keyrus actually does, for those who don't know us. We do have data and digital strategy, which is what I sort of led off with, but arguably the largest part of our practice focuses on number 2, data and analytics solutions, which we've been standing up for, honestly, the last 30 years. This year is the 30th anniversary of Keyrus as an organization. As you might imagine, in more recent years, we have expanded into artificial intelligence, and that is now one of the major offerings that we also have. And rounding us out, enterprise performance management, so budgeting, forecasting, and all that good stuff is another major arm of our offering, as well as digital, multi-experience, omni-channel, customer data platforms, all those good things to make the user experience seamless is another one of the five arms of the Keyrus starfish there, if you will. So that's all I'll say about us, and let's move on to the meat of the presentation.
So as just a quick kind of intro for Orlando Utilities Commission, we are a vertically integrated utility in Central Florida. You can see some of the stats on that. Vertically integrated means that we control everything from generation all the way through distribution and our customers. We have our own generation portfolio. We also service water, and then we have a handful of ancillary services around chilled water, commercial lighting, EV services, things in that nature. And so, you know, having this kind of broad portfolio means we have a lot of data coming from a lot of different sources. And so these kind of efforts are really quintessential to kind of successful operations long-term, and anything in kind of a operational efficiency transformation space, so kind of understanding where we should go into the future. So again, this is a very kind of pertinent topic to how we're operating now and in the future. So with that, we can kind of get into the meat of what we've been doing in the data space. If we go to the first slide, we are on a transformational journey. In the past, we were very much a paper maps type organization. We had a lot of institutional knowledge. We had a lot of kind of spreadsheets, technology that was kind of in the old school. We still have a few access databases flowing around. There was a lot of kind of singular data source considerations. But as we think through it, we're trying to hit more like what a GPS would be today versus a paper map, right? You've got the data of the map, but then you also have every map surrounding that map at your beck and call. You also have the ability to search what gas stations are nearby, restaurants, traffic, police officers, all the good stuff, right? There's a lot of data that's coming into a single pane of glass that you can then leverage to make the best decisions in real time. And that's really what we're trying to do here in this process is how do we get all of our data centralized? How do we get it modeled? And then how do we deliver it to our business units, our internal stakeholders, such that they can leverage it and make truly efficient data-driven decisions in that space. So how do we go from, a 100-year-old organization that has been doing data in a lot of different ways, a lot of different places, a lot of different formats, to a single pane of glass for our operations teams, our financial teams, all of those internal stakeholders at the end of the day, so that we can continue to deliver extremely reliable service, but also keep our economics in check and make sure that the decisions that we're making are the kind of right decisions moving forward. So as we go to the next slide, a lot of that starts with understanding current state. As we went through the entire organization, we talked to a bunch of the business units, got kind of feedback from them. There was a lot of issues with barriers to accessing data, making sure every organization within OUC had their own data solution. It was in different places, different applications, different areas within the network. So there's a lot of kind of different silos that the data existed within and different tools and source systems that we had to kind of identify and understand. There was also a rather significant manual process to accessing data. You had to go and find that data source, get access to it, understand what that data source was from either the subject matter experts or anybody who was around that could answer those questions, sometimes the vendors. And a lot of this just really created slow, non-repeatable solutions. We had to go to our customer accounts to understand who the customer was, and then understand from the operations side, what meter they had, and we had to understand what badge at what time, and then go and figure out what transformers they were connected to and substations. It was very difficult to track a kilowatt or an electron through our entire network. And then it was a data management issue, right? So there was a lot of issues with, over 100 years, data wasn't really a thing day one that was considered. It kind of came onto the scene over time. So we didn't have really robust data management practices in space. So when it comes to sharing data, who's allowed to see it? Who's allowed to have that access? How is it structured in a way that it all kinds of comes together? So again, fixing a lot of problems at the end of the day that really kind of spoke to, how these things come about. I think a lot of anybody who's in this type of an organization has seen these same type of problems. And so hearing it from our business units, it really allowed us to kind of focus on and partner with Keyrus to figure out a process and a way to solve those items. As we go to the next slide. So a lot of this came to basically mapping data, right? Like we can talk about mapping data through GIS, which is literal maps, but it also came into how do we map the data out? How do we bring it into a centralized location? How do we model it together and then start delivering that? As we think through tracing an electron, you need to understand what your customers are doing. You need your customer data. You need to understand what GIS, how it's mapped together, how they actually physically connect. And then you need the metering to understand where it's metered along the way. It's metered at the customer site, it's metered at substations, it's metered at generation. And then finally, you have the EMS, which is basically the operational data. What's happening at each of those locations, how is it all coming together, so that we can truly understand and track that electron from start to finish. And then all the pieces around it. How much did it cost to upgrade those lines? How much did it cost to do some of these things? What was the impact and the sentiment of the customer? How do you bring all of this data into a centralized platform so that you can access it and basically bring it all together at the end of the day into a solution that's really valuable and provides reliable, vetted data to our business unit customers that is very fast to access and comes with all the understanding that they would need to truly use that solution in that space. So as we go to the next slide, A lot of this started with evaluating what the different tools were and technologies. We had a really solid business partner in our metering team that kind of helped us kick off this process and really led that evaluation at the beginning. They had some meter data that they wanted to find a solution for, and so they kicked us off in this process. And then in the 2020s, we took over and started looking at some proof of concepts with emerging technologies, how we could centralize some of the data, and then really built the centralization strategy around that of how do we bring all this data into a centralized location, stitch it together, model it together, and have it accessible for kind of the insights. If generation is generating electrons, they're doing a piece of that, but there's an economic consideration. There's true ups, there's vendor relationships. There's a lot of things that kind of go with those things. So again, how do you bring all of that data into a single pane of glass? I have a demonstration or a concept for you guys as we go to the next slide on what that kind of delivers for us at the end of the day. By being able to map out all of our data across our portfolio, look at where the hotspots are, look at where there's large consumers, look at where there's EV penetrations, we start to see patterns. We start to be able to overlay different kind of views and data sets into singular looks that allow us to make decisions. So we can take something like this where we have our high load customers, we have some EV penetration. We can start to stitch together where do we need some charging stations? Is there availability for charging stations from a capacity standpoint? So again, what are the decisions that you can derive by having this data together into that single look? As we go to the next slide, we have a different use case around upgrades. So as we're looking for this particular effort, we're talking about undergrounding some of our laterals, which is a segment of our feeders of the power lines, basically. But when you make a decision like that, you are now making an investment. So what's the right decision for that investment? Do we need to upsize the wire? Do we need to change the transformers? What are the decisions we need to make as we decide to underground a segment? And then how do we invest in that? As we look with the data that we have now, we can take a look at EV adoption in this area and see what is the likelihood that these houses will either have EVs today or we will have them tomorrow. And so we have a very robust set of data for EVs. We can now put them at every house in this area and look at their adoption models over the past 5 years. How are we leveraging that? Are we seeing load growth in these areas? How do we stitch together all of these meters to their transformers, judge their capacity, look at those kind of power flow considerations, and then create forecast models for PV adoption, which may reduce load, or EV adoption, which may increase load, or upgrades? Is this area turning over and maybe making upgrades that would increase efficiencies and reduce energy consumption? We know where our auditors for conservation go and who is getting conservation rebates. So we can look at where are we seeing the adoption of that, and is that impacting the load on these feeders, so that we can start to look out into a 30+ year investment and say, what is the right decision for this? How are we using the data to make these decisions and to make sure that whatever we're doing is right, such that we're not replacing a transformer in 2 years, that we're not having to go and reconductor this in a couple of years, or find out in 3 or 4 years from now that it is oversized and that we have gold plated something that shouldn't have been gold plated, and there's investment that's not seeing a return like it should. So again, how do we bring all of this together to make those kind of long-term decisions? As we go to the next slide. So with taking those boundary conditions, we can take all of that, map it together, look at the diversity of those feeders, what is the deviation of the consumption of those feeders, look at how that's changed over time. We see a reduction in capacity here, but there may be other things that are growing in similar areas or nearby considerations. So we'll zoom out to other laterals in the area and see how they're reacting. So again, it gives us all of that kind of knowledge that we need to make confident decisions for the future state and make sure we're making the right economic decisions for our customers and keeping the costs down while still maintaining reliability at the end of the day. As we go to the next slide, I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about drones. Another thing we can do with this data is start to leverage drones more effectively. We have a fleet of drones that are able to go out and do inspections in the area, but what's the right cadence to fly those drones? How do we track the data that comes from those drones? So one of the things that we've spent a lot of time doing is taking the drone data, the metadata from the drone itself, figuring out where the drone's located, what its altitude is, which way it's pointing. We can then take that and create a map image of where that drone photo overlays the actual Earth and stitch that to our GIS data so that we can take every asset within that boundary condition and start to stitch the data to the assets. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a representation of that. This is actually one of our facilities that we operate out of. We took a picture of it. This picture was taken long before we started doing this effort. But with the image that we had, the metadata of the drone, where it was, how high it was, which way it was pointing, the optics of the lens, we were able to basically take that and map it out onto our two-dimensional map, basically map it out onto the surface of the Earth. And then what we can do is take the GPS locations of all the assets in our territory and see what assets fall within that boundary condition and stitch this image to those assets so that we can see history of the imagery. We can see what assets are within there and start to connect the data. So when we do computer vision on this image and find problems, this particular image wouldn't have a lot, but we have a lot of distribution considerations, whether it's frayed wires or bird impacts or other considerations that we would want to deal with, transformer issues, dips out, things like that. We can then stitch that information back to the asset. And when we do dispatch, we know where we're sending that person. Drones end up with thousands upon thousands of images in that space, and managing all of that data becomes very cumbersome if you don't have automated tools that allow you to kind of do it in a seamless manner. If you're trying to track it flight by flight, that's great. You should definitely do that. We do try to do that. But when you're stitching together, 5 or 10 hours of flights, and you're trying to leverage that data and get that to the operations team so that they can make good decisions with the data, you need to be able to map it. You need to be able to overlay it with your assets. You need to be able to deliver that image back to them in a way that they can leverage and look at. And you need to be able to give them the metadata of what's within there in that space. And then it also pays dividends for long-term things like pole attachments and things like that. If we have historical information of imagery over time, we can look at when pole attachments went up or when things changed in the area that may impact how we operate. And so again, how do you leverage this data and how do we bring it together for kind of the ultimate value at the end of the day? And I think that is the extent of my piece. I'll turn it over to Jeff, or to, sorry, Kenny, thanks.
Thanks, Justin, for sharing all the exciting things your teams at OUC are working on. So from here, what I'd like to talk more about is what foundations you need in place to centralize that data and to do these kinds of analysis and discuss some of the technology considerations. So you need the right foundation to build a data ecosystem that the whole entire organization can benefit from. So of course you need solutions, but you also need teams in place who can support those solutions. So a critical area for utilities to consider here, the platform has to be interoperable with existing on-prem systems. We know on-prem is still critical and it's going to continue to be critical in running utilities businesses. And so the architecture of your centralized data foundation needs to be able to maintain that flexibility for hybrid cloud on-prem deployments. And you need to keep traceability as well, so people understand where data is coming from and how it's being used. Cloud and infrastructure security are still of the utmost importance for utilities. And so our design needs to additionally be able to enforce access and security controls to make sure we're aligning with American FERC regulations and industry standards. You'll need tools as well to monitor, identify, and resolve data quality issues, and to do that proactively. So trust in the data and the numbers that you're looking at is ultimately what drives adoption for a platform like this. And without that trust, you can't be confident in making decisions. And so that trust is important, and making sure that you're understanding the impact to the business is essential. So by taking data from many different source systems and applications and centralizing it into one place, like we've been talking about, we're able to help these teams spend less of their time running different reports, stitching data together, and they can spend more time learning from the data, extracting insights from the data, and ultimately driving value to the business. So we need a solution that can meet the business teams where they are, give them some intuitive, modern, easy to use tools that are scalable, to make sure that we're able to supercharge their workflows. And so these are the building blocks of the centralized data foundation. The bottom line is when these foundations are in place, you'll be better equipped to answer these questions quickly, to scale confidently, and to ultimately find some value from that data sooner. So if we go on to the next slide, when we think about enabling data-driven operations, you need to consider some specific industry needs. So for all utilities, you're going to need to track critical data points like consumption, billing from customers, data about the load that you're experiencing on different grid assets, which of course is changing rapidly due to renewables and sustainability initiatives. And you'll need information from SCADA systems and EMS systems and all of these things to be able to measure this effectively. Oftentimes, you're going to need to be able to measure some of these data points in near real time as well if you're using it not only for analytics, but for supporting operational decision making. So it's important that the platform handles a large volume and variety of different types of data. So that means supporting large data sets like what's coming from SCADA systems. It also means being able to support geospatial analytics. And so, for example, a tool like Snowflake supports some advanced geospatial functionalities. So these all play a major role in some of these operational considerations, outage management, distribution planning, field operations. And of course, security and compliance are underlying all of this, and that continues to be critical. So as I said, to comply with NERC and FERC regulations, we need a framework that can support giving the right departments and the right people the right access to the right data points. So you need to consider who needs access to what in order to do their job, and what are their responsibilities, what are regulations around that data. Sometimes delays need to be built in for certain data points, and so we're able to use tools like row-level security, dynamic data masking, role-based access controls, to make sure that we're giving everyone in the business what they need to succeed, but also while keeping any sensitive information secure. And with the amount of data that's available today, it's more important than ever to make sure we're empowering these experts with all of these new powerful technologies. So these subject matter experts are enabled to explore data, to build self-service analytics, to share insights without relying on what can be time-consuming IT cycles. So breaking down these bottlenecks and speeding up the rate of innovation is a very impactful thing to consider here. But a foundational need of all of this, none of it is possible if the data remains siloed. So you need to centralize it. To do that, we're using Click Talent data integration to connect all of these different applications, databases, to integrate data from across all of these different source systems, both on-premise and in the cloud, and using Talent to orchestrate all of those processes and all of these different workflows. And so taking advantage of this capability, we're able to supplement some of these fragmented systems with more unified data models that standardize analysis and ultimately enable broader access to that data, helping departments collaborate with each other and have more visibility into what's happening across the business. And so with that, we'll hand it back to Matt to talk about what comes next.
Great. Thanks a lot, Kenny. So I will I'll round out the presentation part of the presentation, if you will, by taking a few minutes to talk about how you might attack this type of challenge. So as Mr. Deming said, in God we trust, all others must bring data. And I just put that up there for a chuckle because, I mean, data is the through line here. Everything that we've spoken about first with Justin's part, it was literally, data in action. So the things that he's actually doing to improve the service, the forecasting, the resilience, the hardening of the grid, all that at OUC. And then Kenny took us through sort of the nuts and bolts and some of the key considerations. So definitely, data centralization and just data, use, and I'm blanking on the word here, but is really the key here. So let's take a look at the next slide for how you might think about this. So a solid data strategy is really, when you think about it, what's needed here. It's not quite enough to just have a business strategy or an operations strategy. Sure, you might know what hurts, where you want to go, where you need to be in 5 years, the kind of revenue or the kind of numbers or KPIs that you're looking for. But at this point, data is such an integral component of all that, that in our humble opinion, and certainly from what we've seen in the marketplace, inside and outside of the utilities space, a solid data strategy is really kind of non-negotiable. So on the one hand, data and its management imply an infrastructure which is not free. So you've got all kinds of applications, ERPs, data storage things, data lakes, dashboards, all kinds of tools and software that are just letting you manage and capture and track that data. So in that sense, from just an investment management perspective, you want to be paying attention to what it is you need to do with the data, what you need and expect from it, and then whether your, if you like, your repository or your list of assets for managing is up to speed and matching what you need from that data. You also need to look at managing the life cycle of that data, or at least being aware of it. How long do you need to retain it? What are the regulatory requirements around it? How clean is it, etc. Data centralization, accessibility, these are just table stakes, and just so many of our clients are still operating in silos. This is for perfectly good historical reasons. The silos are usually linked either to recent acquisitions or even old acquisitions, I'm afraid, or they're linked to just the internal functions of the organization, whether it's finance, billing, delivery, operations. All of these things make sense, but increasingly you cannot ignore the fact that customers and users do not care how you're organized internally or what challenges you're facing internally following expansions, mergers, consolidations, and things like that. You have to look at what the customer experience of dealing with your organization is, and you need to shape the data accordingly. Risk mitigation is an obvious one, either letting too much data out or having incorrect data that's just simply, not right, depending on the regulatory environment that you're in. And Justin will tell us that his environment is highly regulated, and it's even more so once you get out of the municipalities and you have rate settings and things like that. The data has got to be as close to perfect as you can get it. Okay, adaptability and growth, that's kind of an obvious one. And then the holy grail, data-driven decision-making, next best options, and then AI. AI runs off the same data as all of your analytics systems. If it's badly organized or hard to get to, AI will suffer as well. It's super smart, but it's not that smart. So you need to be paying attention to the data strategy. You need to have it organized. You need to get ahead of all that. So that's sort of almost the problem statement. Now, let's take a quick look at some of the ways that you might attack that. Okay, so Kenny took us through, again, a lot of the nuts and bolts and the moving parts of the tech stack that, in this case, Orlando Utilities Commission is working with. They have a very clear vision, thanks to people like Justin, of where they want to go, and they are pretty far down the road in some areas. So they're at a certain level of maturity, and they've gone a certain distance down the road. Some people are perhaps just starting out, or they're further along in some areas, not as far along in others. The thing is, it can be kind of overwhelming. So for organizations that, let's say, don't know where to start or don't have any idea where to start, we have a way to demystify it. And I've given a high level overview of our approach in those cases. And this is sort of the full kahuna. If you really don't know, we can start off with the project, we can socialize it, we can help you define its objectives, its reasonable expectations, we can handle the kickoff with you so that everybody's fully aware and on board. Change management and user involvement around this kind of initiative is super important. We anchor any of these types of strategy projects in business objectives and requirements. And from there, we help you to determine in an objective, quantifiable, measurable, and defensible way what type of capabilities you are going to need, and almost as importantly, what you're not going to need, because not everybody needs everything. That gives us an idea of the gap that we're dealing with in both maturity and technical capability. And from there, we start to be able to sort of cinch down into actual actions you could be taking, strategies for closing those gaps, prioritizations, recommended solutions, options for solutions, tool selections if necessary, and beyond that, a very detailed roadmap of implementation steps that you could take. Now, obviously, Keyrus then hopes that you would embark on that journey with us, as many have, and we're very pleased to say that we are engaged for multi-years with some clients as new challenges pop up and new ambitions. But that's sort of the 30,000 foot look. Often, many of our clients say, we don't need all that stuff. We know exactly what the problem is. We just need help solving it. Well, that cuts out a lot of the analysis and assessment phase, because we don't need to figure that out. We can just zoom ahead to the roadmap, to the prioritization, and to helping you solve that specific challenge. Yet other clients say, we don't know you, we don't know how we want to attack this. We have very rapid assessments that are low risk, low cost. We can come in very quickly. We have a variety of accelerators and tools that we can use to very quickly, at least getting back to Justin's map analogy, show you sort of where you are, how far you are from the goal, what are the likely directions that you're going to want to focus on in terms of improving infrastructure, improving data access, improving data quality. But we won't go much farther than that at first, unless you would like us to. And that can be done in literally a few weeks, depending on how many divisions or departments you'd like us to look at. So with these couple of slides, I really just wanted to make it clear that help is available, and there are ways to cut through the fog of war, if you will. And we have been doing this for quite a few years, and love the journey and love helping clients get through to the core business value that they're trying to achieve. And with that, I will stop talking about Keyrus again and open it up to questions.
Thank you, Matt. So we do have some questions here in the chat and in the questions function. So we'll just go through them. And if you have any more questions that you have not put in the chat or the question function yet, please feel free to do so now. The first question we have is from Jose. He said, you mentioned your data was siloed and business units weren't combining data sets. How did you prioritize which data initiatives to tackle first to ensure proper scaling and growth? And Justin, I believe this question was for you.
Sure. So for us, we took kind of a hybrid approach. We really looked at going around and talking to the entire organization about their pain points, about what they had in that space. And then we kind of selectively chose use cases that crossed those silos that had the greatest kind of ROI while also being kind of what we would term a quick win or a near-term win. And that way we could build confidence and value to our customers and kind of show what that means for them and what they could kind of get out of that. And so when you decide to go down one of these journeys, you are solving the data problems, right, and the technology problems of the platforms, but the biggest problem you're solving is a people problem. And it's an opportunity because it really allows you to work with the business units across your entire organization. But these folks have been operating for a very long time with their own data, doing their own stuff. You know, there's trust issues, there's thoughts about, it's my thing, whatever these are. You really need to build relationships within the organization that allows you to build that trust and confidence of those people to give you the access to the data. Because again, if you have executive support, you can push these things through. That's great. That's generally not how it works. Usually you have to get collaboration, you need to get consensus, you need to build kind of reliability within the organization. Ours specifically had a couple false starts on data. So we had to overcome some of those considerations. So again, relationship building is a huge part of this as well, of how do you convince people that there's value, because you're asking them to take their time and do this work. And then also making sure that you have the right partners at the table that can deliver that value at the end of the day. And so you want to start there. And then as you're building, you can start to build a more like general foundation, really focus on getting the tools and stuff ready. We focused very much on use cases day one, and then started to transition into larger scale transfers and centralization efforts and things like that built more of a foundation for future states and things along the way. And so as you mature, build your governance, as you mature, build your kind of thought process on what data looks like. As you mature, start to create a better kind of process evaluation or use case evaluation framework. And we have started putting some of those into play. But initially, you want to focus on touching as many people as you can so that they understand what you're doing, they understand the value, and they can see it. And then start to build those relationships so that people have the confidence, they have the ability, they have the kind of thought process of doing this. And then as you deliver data and you deliver that value, they start to evangelize what you're doing. And all of a sudden you hit a pivot point where you go from begging people to do things to prioritizing people. And we have definitely crossed that transition, that inflection point here. We now are trying to prioritize and get more resources and build more capabilities to deliver the kind of volume that we're getting requests for at this point. So it's kind of all together at the end of the day.
Thank you, Justin. Our next question is from Leslie, and they ask, what frameworks or methodologies does Keyrus recommend for utilities beginning a data and AI strategy? So Kenny or Matt, this is for you.
I can go first. I know that on the strategy side, we have accelerators that can relatively quickly take a look at, based on a relatively small selection of questions that are spread out across, I believe it's 6 or 7 dimensions. We can assess pretty much exactly where you are right now. And then based on a few interview questions, looking at the business, we can assess either departmentally what the major gaps are and the recommended course of action is. We can produce an executive summary along with a variety of radar charts and plots that show the gap and recommended next steps. So I did mention that briefly in my section. So this is a perfect question for that. And we find that it's a good way to sort of get the ball rolling. We find that a lot of times clients internally are not even aligned necessarily. So this gives a lot of good talking points that are relatively objective and really is a good place to start your journey, at least on the strategy side around data maturity, data governance, and AI readiness. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on the tech side, Kenny.
Yeah, and I think just the other side of the coin there, in terms of your technical strategy, you need to have a vision for how the platform is going to work, right? It's really important, as we discussed, to centralize that data. So how are you going to do that? You're going to, connect to those data sources, bring it into some central location. Where is that? How are you going to be sharing the data out? How are your end users going to be consuming it? Are they using pre-built reports? Are they building their own reports? Are they even in some cases, running SQL queries against the data warehouse or the data lake themselves? Do you have data scientists who need access to, raw data files or other kinds of use cases? So, the data strategy needs to consider the organizational aspects, but it also needs to consider the technologies and how those are meeting the needs of your end users. And so that is exactly what Matt talked about in defining that strategy, is making sure you have the right vision in place and the right foundation and the right framework to go from wherever it is you are today to having a fully functional data analytics and operational data methodology deployed at your organization.
Thanks, Matt and Kenny. Our next question is from Tejas, and they ask, what were the biggest internal barriers to adopting a centralized data strategy, and how were they overcome? And Justin, I think that's for you again.
That's a fun one. So I would say that it's the biggest thing you run into is people trying to, I guess there's a couple of things. One is, I think the people thing is a huge opportunity for people to get alignment, to get understanding, to understand what the value is, how to deliver that at the end of the day. So as you talk through these things, you need to make sure that you're bringing your leadership teams along, because the people who have the data, you're asking them to spend time doing the centralization effort. And the value may not be with their organization at the end of the day. So what you're delivering may have value to other groups within the organization. So you need these kind of cross-functional concepts to come together. You need people to be able to explain what the value is, really showing what that looks like. And then the other one is just the fundamentals of the whole thing. In a data centralization strategy, you are taking numerous source systems. You are trying to collect the data, understand the data, model the data, and deliver the data to the customers. Those understandings are typically not on paper today. So you need to build all of that repository of information. You need to build the understanding of how the flows go. And then there's also a trust model concept that whatever you're doing with your data, especially in the cloud, I think today it's easier than it used to be, but there was a long time period where cloud was a very difficult thing for people to understand and feel comfortable with. So again, how do you build those trust considerations with the different business units, with the different partners at the end of the day? And so again, I think as much as it is technology, it is also a process and people consideration that you need to be investing in. And then having leadership alignment is very valuable. So spend some time working with your leaders and getting them to understand so that they can help you enforce and prioritize at that point. But those are people, I think, is a big one. Technology, you can bring in folks like Keyrus that make that a simple process. Still a process, but getting all the people to align and getting the roadblocks out of the way and getting it all to align to an actual schedule that makes sense, that is a tricky one to solve at the end of the day. And so building the reliance, building the trust, building the relationships is critical in that kind of approach. So make sure that you're kind of tackling all of those along the way.
Thank you, Justin. And our last question is for you again as well. It's a follow-up from Jose. And they say, as you scale and grow, how did you ensure proper governance considering so many different data entry points such as IoT, sensors, drones, CRMs, and more?
So that's a dance, right? So a lot of our false starts when we first started these efforts, before I got into the process, really focused on trying to solve governance day one. They really wanted to solve all of the governance considerations, all of the pieces, get the governance solid and perfected before they did anything. The problem with that is that you're asking for all pain and no value. Getting your governance has long-term value, but it doesn't have direct value to your business partners and your different customers along the way. So you really need to take a strategic approach to how are you delivering the data? How are you building the governance as you go? How are you putting these things into place? And you need to start with table stakes governance that make sure that you're protected, make sure that you're making the right decisions. Creating boundary conditions makes a lot of sense day one. But along the way, you need to make sure that the process flows are secure and then build the data governance around that, and really trying to work with your business partners to identify that as something that you want to be able to deliver value along the way, to justify the time that they now have to take to go through and classify everything and define everything and track it all and make sure that it's all there. So you want to start with good guardrails. You want to start building out and delivering value. And then you want to make sure that you are focused on the governance, because if you don't do it along the way, it won't get done at the end, and you'll have a mess, that you don't have a good solution for at the end. So again, it is a little bit of a balance of trying to solve the day-to-day needs while also building the governance and the good foundation along the way. I would caution anybody in this process that if you get too focused on the governance, too focused on how does it all kind of come together, your business partners at some point will run out of time, and they'll throw their hands up in the air and not give you what you need to be successful in that space. And you need your business partners along the way to inform all of these things and to show the value and show the decision making along the way. So it is a bit of a balance. You want to make sure that you do have it in flight, but I would be careful on how nuanced and very nitpicky you get with it. Make sure that you've got it to a layer you're safe, but don't kill yourself on that space and try to define everything day one, because you'll lose momentum, you'll lose people's interest, and that really is a death nail for these types of projects, because it really is a people collaboration process at the end of the day.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for answering all those questions, Justin. They certainly seem to be piling on you, but all good. And I think unless any last minute questions pop up, we are good to go. So let's wrap it up. And thanks everyone for joining us for this little webinar. And we hope to see you all soon for similarly interesting topics. Have a good day.